There are a number of fees and expenses that are incorporated into the closing process and are part of this settling up that happens in that process. And so those fees include the loan application fee, and so that's the fee that is charged to the borrower for the lender to actually take their application. The credit report fee, which is the cost that is passed on to the borrower for the lender to request the borrower's credit report from those three different credit bureaus. The loan origination fee is a fee that the lender charges to actually originate or process or create that loan. Lender's attorney's fees are the fees that the lender's attorney would charge for processing the loan paperwork and the legal documents. The property appraisal fee is a cost that is passed on to the borrower by the lender to cover the cost of having an appraiser go out and examine the property and determine the actual value of the property. And so that's where we would get our loan to value ratio. Fees for property survey and photos. So these aren't always required, but a property survey is when someone goes out and determines the actual boundaries of the property. And there's a cost to that is passed along as well. Fees for preparation of the loan amortization schedule by the lender. And so the loan amortization schedule shows all of the payments that will be required on the loan and the portion of each payment that's going to pay down principal and the portion that's going to pay for interest. Loan discount points. Recall that the borrower would have the option of paying discount points in order to buy down the interest rate. And then any prepaid interest would all be incorporated into the closing process. And also during the closing process, prorations would be determined and the amount of money that would go into an escrow account and any payments that need to be made to third parties. So with regard to prorations, during the closing process, it would be disclosed, well, actually prior to the actual closing, the disclosure would happen, but they would go over all of this at the closing to show what the property taxes are, how much has been paid to date, and so what the prorated amount is that's included in the closing cost. The escrow account would be opened and an initial balance would be deposited into that account. The escrow account is an account that's used to collect monies to pay for those property taxes, mortgage insurance if it's required, hazard insurance, and possibly even homeowners or condominium insurance or condominium fees. So the amount that will go into that escrow account would be shown and calculated and included in the closing documents and closing process. Hazard insurance as well would be paid for out of the escrow account. So the amount of the hazard insurance that's incorporated into the closing would be included in these documents. If there's any mortgage cancellation insurance that's included in escrow, that would be disclosed. Title insurance and lawyer's title opinion. So these are fees that would be incurred to ensure that there is a clear title to the property that's being sold. Any release fees that are associated with canceling outstanding liens on the property would be incorporated into the closing process. And then attorney's fees. So it could be lender's attorneys and it could be the closing attorney. Their fees, that stuff doesn't happen for free. So their fees would be incorporated into the closing process. Often there is a pest inspection prior to closing. In some states, a termite inspection or a termite bond would be required. And so the cost of those inspections and bonds would be included in closing. And then any commissions that are paid to the sellers and to the buyer's agents would be included in the closing process. Additionally, there are statutory costs. So those would be costs that are required by law as part of the closing, and those would be included. So recording fees, which would be the fees that are paid to just record the mortgage and the note in the public record. Those fees would be included in the closing process, and then any transferred tax that's imposed by the county. And then finally, you need to understand the requirements of the Real Estate Settlement and Procedures Act. So this is a law that is intended to protect borrowers. And so there's documentation that must be given to the borrowers at or before closing that explains their rights. And so those rights include advanced disclosure of settlement cost. And so it is required for the closing costs to be disclosed to the buyer 3 days, within 3 days after the time of the application. And so that would be a good faith estimate of what those costs would be, understanding that once we get all of the details of the loan, that those could change or be adjusted a little bit. Another provision of RESPA is that a seller may not require the use of a specific title company as a condition of the sale. There can't be any kickbacks or referral fees related to the property sale. And a uniform settlement statement is used by the settlement agent at closing. This makes it easier for buyers and sellers to understand exactly what fees and costs are being paid by the buyer and being paid by the seller. There's also a requirement that the borrower has the right to inspect the settlement statement 1 day prior to closing. And there's a limit on the amount that a creditor can require the borrower to initially deposit into that escrow account.